All right, let's talk a little bit about prayer because this is a somewhat controversial subject. Some people don't believe in it. Some people don't think it works. Some people want to know how it works. And so here's some of the things that we're learning. I was required as a child, my dad was a preacher, to learn a text with the scripture every week. It's probably a good thing I did because the way my brain functions, rote memorization is really hard for me. So that developed some skills. I do know my name. But I was puzzled about this, and I would say to my dad, I can't pray without ceasing. You want me to practice the piano an hour a day, the vibes 30 minutes, you know, the ukulele another 30 minutes. I mean, how am I going to pray without ceasing? Can't happen. And then there's school. And I remember him just patting me on the shoulder and saying, Arlene, do your best. All of my maternal relatives, pretty much, French, Catholic. So when I got this quote by Mother Teresa, I paid attention to it. She says, prayer doesn't demand we interrupt our work, but we continue working as if it were a prayer. I can do that. In fact, I do most of my praying when I'm driving on the highway. I do keep my eyes open. I don't know how you were taught to pray. Mine was on your knees, head bowed, hands folded, eyes closed. Okay, that's pretty limiting. The God I worship will hear me no matter what I'm doing anywhere. And that's a comfort. Thought you might like to notice that prayer, at least in the United States, is increasing. I don't know if that's Trump or terrorism, or both. 2002, 42% of Americans pray for their own health, 24% pray for the health of others. Look at it now. 79% are praying for their own health and healing, and 87% are praying for the health of others. The other fun thing is to notice that a lot of people pray, and it has nothing to do with their religious beliefs. So I was surprised to see that atheists and agnostics, about 6% of them pray every single day. And 27% of people who say they aren't anything, and we're all something, but they said they weren't anything in particular, pray every day. So it looks like it's going up in America. And it's, you know, religions act like they have the corner on prayer. Prayer is communicating with a power bigger than yourself. And you can be aligned with religion, but you don't have to be to pray. I did find research by Larry Dossey that kind of brought me up short. He says, be careful how you pray and what you pray for, because like drugs, prayers can have effects that are positive, neutral, or negative. And this, I'm embarrassed. I mean, I know embarrassment's a choice, so I hardly ever go there, but this is embarrassing. 1 in 20 Americans admitted they'd prayed that others would be harmed. You get ticked at somebody and pray that, you know, they'll run into a tree or, you know, be run over by a train. I was very, very surprised about that. So he might have a point. What is prayer? Candace Pert, who was the researcher in American National Institutes of Health, first to identify opiate receptors in the brain, which changed the way we deal with addictive behaviors, says prayer is just a form of meditation. When you do PET scan studies and the person's praying, and I'll show you one drawing, the frontal cortex lights up brightly on the screen. It's just amazing to watch. And back to Dr. Dossey, prayer is a universal being and not doing phenomenon. You're just being and communicating. It's an attitude of the heart. Lots of studies that show that prayer works. But nobody knows how it works, in the sense that we don't even know the energy band that prayer flows on. Mind Body Health Journal, I did a whole issue on prayer and how it works. It has been found to be effective and beneficial in the clinical treatment of patients. Study after study after study, 212 is the last number I saw. Now, one of the researchers says this: science cannot prove the existence or non-existence of a superhuman force or whether such an entity answers prayer. But how prayer practices affect health is an empirical question. We can and should use empirical methods to answer this question. And empirical just means you look around and you see how prayers are being answered. Science doesn't know how it's happening. Many Christians believe they know how it's happening, but science doesn't know how it's happening, but it's happening, just doesn't know how. Lots of prayer types. The type of prayer that's been shown to have the most personal benefit are the prayers where you're thinking about spiritual things, thinking about God by whatever name you use, and listening for impressions that you might get after you're done praying. Lots of different types. There's passive, and I'm not sure why my slides are jumping around. I guess because they're in a different country. I don't know. You know, this is becoming my second home. This is my 13th trip, and next year I'll be here again twice. I think it's because I was born in Canada. I mean, you all don't seem that strange to me. I still can't speak right. Suzanne is trying to teach me. We had a session yesterday. She tried to teach me to say the word here. And after about 47 attempts, I got here. And Rob fell on the floor laughing, so I think maybe language is not one of my gifts. So there's passive prayer where, you know, you focus on a sound or a word, and passive means it's not building brain strength. And then there's active, although the brain kind of, maybe the brain wanted to emphasize that. You focus on a specific thought or idea, and the brain becomes very active, but it uses much less energy than it ordinarily does. There's directed prayers where you ask for a specific thing, but that's where Dr. Dossie said, be careful what you pray for, because you just might get it. And non-directed prayer, which is what I'm doing more of. You pray, may the best thing happen. I don't know what would be the best thing. But may the best thing happen, and then just give me enough brains to recognize that. Characteristics of prayer from research, which I think is fascinating. It's instantaneous and nothing can block it. Not even a lead-lined room. It is not some conventional form of energy that is sent and received. You know, we talk about the speed of light. That's a type of energy. It's not any energy that we know about. There is some beginning research about something called akashic energy, which apparently is absolutely instantaneous. No other energy is instantaneous. It can be very quick, but it's not instantaneous, and prayer is instantaneous. Your own belief can strengthen a prayer, but it works even when the person doesn't know they're being prayed for. There's something called the placebo effect. It impacts up to 70% of how well a treatment works. So if I'm praying for somebody, I'm going to tell them, because the belief that the treatment will work is up to 70% of the treatment's efficacy. And the same thing for prayer. And distance is not a factor. It can be local, like we had this morning, or it can be non-local, clear on the other side of the planet. The personally beneficial prayers, and meditative prayer, as we found, is the most effective. The prayers that focus on gratitude, celebration, awe, a positive vision of the future without any anger or resentment, which makes me think of the 1 in 20 Americans who's been mad enough to pray that something awful happened to somebody else. Increases compassion, reduces depression and anxiety, relieves stress, lower blood pressure and heart rate, and eventually can extend life. And one of the reasons they believe is because prayer not only activates the brain, but the brain does the prayer with much less energy use than it usually does. And if you use less energy over time, you tend to extend the length of time that the organism is going to live. Intercessory prayer, when you're praying for somebody else, you're asking for something for them. This is interesting. I don't know a lot about quantum physics, but I have started studying that because quantum physics talks about a fourth dimension and energy types that we can't see. Praying for someone else bears a strong resemblance to non-local events. You know, we said prayer can be local or non-local, in that it's unmediated. The distant changes don't depend on any type of energy or signal that we currently know about in science. It's unmitigated. It's as strong locally as it is non-locally. Distance has no effect on the strength, and it's immediate. Sometimes the changes take place simultaneously to the prayer. Andrew Newberg is the founder of neurotheology, which is a new branch of science that studies the relationship between the brain and spiritual or religious phenomena. Used to be they lumped everything together. Now they're working very diligently to separate what is related to spirituality and what is related to affiliation with a group or religion or a church. He has studied more than 150 brain scans, which are really quite a lot, this early in the science, to observe what happens in the brain when people pray and with different types of prayer. The overall finding is this: not one center, there's not one center in the brain that is activated by prayer, but the whole self seems to be activated. And secondly, there are areas of the brain that are distinctly activated by prayer, and I'll show you a few of those. Here is a drawing of PET scans that Dr. Newberg did. The brighter the colors, the more active the brain is. So on this baseline PET scan, the person's not praying. I don't know what they're thinking about. They're awake, but they're not praying. And you can see there are some bright spots. This is a prayer scan, and I think I have a typo there. This is how I get my slides proofed. You can't proof your own work. And now when you see it blowing up 12 feet tall, then I can see my... So we'll have to change that. This is a scan of a person while they are actually praying, and their brains are in the circular PET scan camera. Notice this: both frontal lobes right here behind your forehead are activated. Look at all the red. Here, there wasn't much going on, just a little sliver there. Look at this, and look how much bigger this is, which is the right frontal lobe behind your right eye, where that's all involved with prayer and meditation. But look down here at this temporal lobe, right here. Not much is happening there, but this is the relational part of the brain. And when you're praying, look how the relational part lights up. Thinking about people you're praying for, thinking about God, so on and so forth. So I've got several things to show the benefits. And I laugh at this one. I don't know why Dr. Newberg didn't just say, you know, prayer pretty much activates the whole brain. Because it increases blood flow to the frontal area, right here, the parietal area, which is this, the temporal area, which is this, and the limbic areas, which are the part right in the middle of the brain, doesn't seem to do a whole lot to the visual cortex, the occipital. Is that because many people close their eyes when they're praying? I don't know. But it's pretty much the whole brain. It decreases metabolic activity, meaning that your brain is using less energy so that it lasts longer. And it can trigger a type of pain relief called deafferentation, which is fascinating. So you got a big cut on your foot and it hurts like old Ned. And you start praying, and your foot's still hurting, but the message about the foot hurting is blocked. It never gets up to the brain to decode it. And so it doesn't completely take away pain forever, but if you're having a really bad episode of pain and you pray, you can get some temporary relief because you stop feeling it. And in the years before I got both of my titanium hips, I'd be in a lot of pain, coming into wherever I'm going to speak with a cane because the doctors didn't want to do it till they absolutely had to do it. And I'd get ready to speak, and I would pray. And I'd say, Lord, I'm going up to speak. I'd really appreciate not registering any pain while I'm speaking. And I would step up here to speak, and I would have zero pain for as long as I was speaking. And I'd sit down and, oh yeah, guess I do have a little pain there. Parietal lobes, right here, they are deactivated during spiritual and religious experiences. What does that mean? It means ordinarily the parietal lobes say, Arlene, you're separate from everybody else. And that's a good thing. We need to know who we are individually and where our boundaries are. But if you are singing hymns and saying prayers, it deactivates some of this, and you begin to feel more collective and included as a group, and that can have some benefit, especially people who are alone and they come to prayer and they feel part of a group. The anterior cingulate, and I don't care whether you remember any of these names, I just want you to know that I finally learned them. The largest bridge that connects the two hemispheres, so the right hand knows what the left hand's doing. In this cutaway of the brain, this is that same big bridge, largest collection of neuronal axons in the brain and body. And the anterior cingulate is like a collar, a collar on your shirt or a blouse, right at the front of the bridge. Prayer increases activity in that part of the brain, and it's considered to be the neurological heart, the part of the brain that clearly distinguishes us from other mammals. Not only is it activated when you pray, but when you feel compassion for others, it's activated, makes you more empathetic. All the brain layers, as I said, are activated. This would be that limbic layer, which was the only piece that we didn't talk about in the first slide. Layers of the brain. First layer, reptilian layer, because that's all reptiles have. Mammalian layer, which all mammals have. We're mammals, so we have that layer. And then you come up here to the neocortex, gray matter, lots of names for it. First and second layers are completely subconscious, although they have tremendous skills and factors that we need to use, functions. Up here in the top, we do have some conscious thought. I mean, the whole thing is not conscious, but estimates are about 15% of what you think about really comes to conscious awareness. So one of the strategies is increase what you're consciously aware of, because you can only manage what you can identify and describe, put a label on it and describe it. Prayer down here in this first layer deactivates the stress response. If something happened and you go into fight or flight, you really don't want to stay there. I think that's one of the problems in Europe right now. All these poor displaced people, they're living in fight or flight. And that's very hard on the brain and immune system. But for us, we go into fight or flight, and then you pray, and it starts dampening that down, which reduces your stress and anxiety. It's a wonderful antidote for stress. And prayer can prevent the protective emotions, anger, fear, and sadness. All emotions are positive. It's the behaviors that are negative. But anger, fear, and sadness are protective emotions to help us deal with specific situations in life. And when you do a PET scan, any one of those activates the right hemisphere. Joy is activating the left hemisphere. I find that very interesting. Joy is the only emotion that has no negative consequences when maintained over time. It is believed to be the default position of the human brain. But few people have learned to live in joy. When any of the protective emotions arise, they're going to activate the right hemisphere, and prayer helps prevent them from just flooding the brain. Very useful. And singing, interesting. I don't sing very much anymore, Rena, but I do love to hear you sing. Back in the late 1800s, my family had a quartet, and we did a lot of singing, but then I did more keyboards, so I would not expose you to singing at this point in my life. When prayers are sung, the brain becomes highly engaged, as singing can stimulate all the divisions of the neocortex. Remember back here? There are the 4 divisions of the neocortex. Left frontal lobe, right frontal lobe, right behind your forehead. And then the 3 posterior lobes on the left and the 3 posterior lobes on the right. Singing activates all of those. Prayers that are spoken aloud stimulate more of the brain. When I was a girl, we used to do reading of prayers out loud sometimes, and certainly the Lord's Prayer. The whole congregation would read the Lord's Prayer, even if they had it memorized. I don't know the reason my father did this, but he would say, let's read the Lord's Prayer together. Okay, now we know that that's much more effective than just doing it by memory. So reading aloud is so stimulating for the brain, it's considered an anti-aging strategy. Recommendations are read for 10 minutes a day aloud. So how about writing out a prayer and reading it aloud? Because that's going to stimulate more of the brain than if you just say it. There's so many things we haven't tapped into yet. Memory and dementia. I'm sure that no one has the goal of losing their memory and becoming involved with dementia. Study participants who prayed and or reflected in a quiet, comfortable place for at least 12 minutes a day, which is nothing, experienced significant improvements in their memory. They took people who were beginning to evidence dementia and started having them pray, and they began to have an improvement in their memory. Prayer also slows the age-related decline of the front lobes. As we get older, especially if we're not drinking enough water, but sometimes just with age, the brain tissue begins to shrink and pull away from the skull, and that is definitely associated with memory loss and dementia. So, according to Neil Nedley, prayer can be viewed as one of the ultimate activities of the frontal lobes because it helps with memory and it helps to prevent shrinkage and dementia. I'm going there. You notice that on the slide, more people prayed for others than prayed for themselves. I found that interesting. Because research is getting more and more clear that the person who prays gets the most benefit. Yeah, science is really clear that prayer does work and helps others. But the greatest benefit occurs in the brain of the person doing the praying. It may resemble forgiveness. You know, lots of research on forgiveness. You do not forgive for the other person. You forgive for yourself. To boost your immune system, to get rid of that enemy outpost in your head that's taking all of this energy to staff because you're so ticked off at the other person. And people say to me, I will not forgive. What they did was dastardly. And I'll go, your choice. I personally have a hard time understanding why you would give that person in the memory of what they did, you know, free room and board in your brain. I mean, come on, let it go. It's their stuff. So the person who forgives benefits the most. Other person doesn't have to even know you're forgiving them. And if you went to them and said, you know, I forgive you for what you did, 50% of the time they're going to say, I didn't do anything to you. What did I do to you? Man, are you hallucinating? So it is about you. And it appears that the person who does the praying may benefit the most. Meditation and prayer are excellent brain power boosters as they battle stress and help to synchronize the brain waves. They reduce levels of the stress hormone, and therefore, as Dr. Jufrey said, they give you some control over the way your brain ages. Yeah, I feel sorry for people who don't know about prayer because they're not having any control over the way their brain ages, because now we know forgiveness and brain helps to extend life in many ways. It positively affects high blood pressure, heart attacks, wound healing, headaches, and anxiety. It doesn't mean that the person who has high blood pressure may eventually get off all medication, but over and over and over again, we see that their medication eventually gets cut in at least half. And the least amount of medication you can take, as far as I'm concerned, the better. Although we do need it for some things. Diabetes, for example. Boy, if your pancreas has stopped making insulin, you better be taking some. Have you heard of diabetes type 3? Diabetes type 3. Diabetes type 3 is now linked with a form of dementia that resembles Alzheimer's. I'd be up in my prayer level. So what's the formula? Anytime, anywhere, any style, about anything. I hear people say, the Lord's only going to answer your prayer if you pray this way, and I'm shaking my head and thinking, oh, please bless that poor benighted soul. Anytime, anywhere, any style, about anything. A minimum of 12, whoops, back that puppy up, went too far. Come on, there we go. Minimum of 12 minutes. Never use a negative thought in prayer, according to Norman Vincent Peale. Only positive thoughts get positive results. So here's my brain's opinion, and I'll tell you when it's research and it's my brain's opinion. My brain's opinion is the God that I serve gets it no matter how I pray. However, he must be just so desperately tired of people whining in prayer. I mean, can you just imagine what a breath of fresh air if somebody actually prays and thanks him for something with no strings attached? However, I thought about Norman Vincent Peale's words, so I remembered the Lord's Prayer. I went and looked up 15 different translations. Unfortunately, I can't read them in the original. My dad could read Hebrew and Greek, but he said I was hopeless. So I looked up 15 translations. And do you realize that every single one of those only talks about positives? It only tells you what to do, and it never tells you what not to do. So maybe Peel had a point. So, prayer. No two brains on the planet are alike. I hope you have that clearly in your mind. No two are alike. For one thing, every thought you think changes the software patterns in your brain, and none of us ever thinks identical thoughts. So we just become more and more different as we get older. I encourage you to start now becoming the person you want to be when you're older. Because if you're a downright grump and nobody feels good after an hour with you, imagine what you're going to be like when you're 100. You're going to be a pariah on the planet. So start now to be the person you want to be then. And when you die, and all things being equal, most of us eventually will die, what do you want people to remember you for? Do you want them to remember you that when you got together and had lunch, you went home, you were depressed for 3 days? And, you know, sorry they died, but man, what a relief. I don't have to listen to that anymore. That's real. You know people in your life who have died, and you go, well, yeah, it's too bad, but I don't have to do this anymore. Become now the person you want to be when you're older. We're really clear. Studies are showing empirically by observation that prayer works. It can positively impact your brain, your health, your longevity, but find your own path. And if somebody tells you you're praying the wrong way, my answer is, oh, thank you for your opinion. I'm praying the way it works for my brain. So I encourage you to find a path. It's worth it. Please stand with me and let's have the benediction. Dear Heavenly Parent, we know that prayer works. We don't know what energy it uses. We don't know how it works. But we ask you and thank you for giving us the desire to pray, the energy to pray, the communication between us and you. And we look forward to when we can do that in person. Thank you in Christ's name. Amen.